Okay, can Lord Varys be the third head of the dragon? Let's try to add to the substantial plot ties between Varys and the Targaryens by examining the times we see three heads appear in the text. We can look and see if Varys is in any way linked metaphorically with one of the heads. In other words, when we see three heads, is one of the heads pantomiming everyone's favorite eunuch? We'll also look in depth at Varys' name meaning and talk about the Varys family in Rome. And last, we'll consider the possibility that Varys suffers from Klinefelter's disease, allowing him to have two of the rare Dragon X genes. Hands off the thumbs down button. Sir Steffon here from the Shoulders of Giants. Today I want to tell the story of the coconut notion that Varys is the third head of the dragon. Our tale begins with the recent discussions in the A Song of Ice and Fire community that have addressed Martin's ability to competently talk about life experiences that he is unfamiliar with, those that aren't his lived experiences, so to speak. As way of an example, I think back to a talk Martin held years ago where he discussed the difficulties he has writing the Bran chapters, because it's been such a long time since he was such a young lad. Thinking along these lines and questioning his ability, I particularly wanted to reread some of the texts surrounding intimacy workers in A Dance with Dragons. I kind of wanted to evaluate for myself Martin's treatment of this sometimes difficult subject, a subject for which he likely has only a little actual lived experience. To this end, I took a close look at the Widow of the Waterfront in Volantis. You may recall that the widow meets with Jorah, who is seeking transport to Meereen for himself and Tyrion. Jorah wants to take Tyrion to Daenerys. While the widow's story is a very poignant tale, I'm most interested in the metaphorical meanings in her story. It is way too much to explore here in this Varys is a third head video, but if you get a chance, take a look at the interesting gift Jorah buys for her. Consider what the bridge means. Note the matriarchal history of the city itself, and definitely look closely at the widow's tears. But what does all this have to do with Varys? Well, I'm a big believer that Martin uses iconology and pantomime to give the reader plot clues. A brief example most people seem to like starts with recognizing the iconological connection between swords and comets. Now picture Joffrey receiving gifts before his wedding. Tyrion gives him a rare historical tomb. Then his grandfather presents him a Valyrian steel sword, which he calls Widow's Wail. What does he do next? He slashes the history book to shreds, a piece of which is lost from the table. Here the scene is a pantomime for the comet that caused a long night and the inevitable interregnum that followed. And I think we have a pretty important pantomime when Tyrion and Jorah encounter three heads on the bridge in Volantis. From Dance with Dragons, Tyrion's 7. At the bridge's center span, the severed hands of thieves and cut purses hung like strings of onions from iron stanchions along the roadway. Three heads were on display as well, 2 men and a woman. Their crimes scrawled on tablets underneath them. A pair of spearmen attended them, clad in polished helms and shirts of silver mail. Across their cheeks were tiger stripes as green as jade. From time to time, the guards waved their spears to chase away the kestrels, gulls, and carrion crows paying court to the deceased. The birds returned to the heads within moments. "What did they do?" Tyrion inquired innocently. The knight glanced at the inscriptions. The woman was a slave who raised her hand to her mistress. The older man was accused of fomenting rebellion and spying for the Dragon Queen. And the young one? Killed his father. So we have a woman who rebels against slavery, an older man who is spying for the Dragon Queen, and a younger man who killed his father. Okay, if that all wasn't too much of a stretch for you, let's take a look at names. Credit Saskatch from Reddit. Now this will take a second to set up, but if you think about it, I promise the payoff in the end is huge. George picks very specific names for each character. If you have a moment later, on my channel page, I put a cool 5-minute video I found of George talking about character names. It's in the playlist called Prime Unified Theory. In any case, I was listening to Secrets of the Citadel the other day. She was talking about these cool name meanings, and she mentioned one I had not heard for Varys. Varus, V-A-R-U-S, is a Roman family name meaning bow-legged. knock-kneed, bent, or crooked. In medicine, varus means, and I'm reading now so it will sound technical, quote, a deformity involving oblique displacement of part of a limb toward the midline. Now bear with me, and in a moment, I will eventually tie this bow-leggedness into our next major point. But first, let's take a quick look at a possibly related pantomime having 3 heads. From Dance Mel 1. The spears were 8 feet long and made of ash. The one on the left hand had a slight crook, but the other 2 were smooth and straight. At the top of each was impaled a severed head. Okay, this pantomime is weak when looked at directly. You have to ask, so what? One of the spears has a crook. But please remember Secrets of the Citadel's point and Varys' connection to the bow-legged Roman family. And note, we now know the bow-legged condition is genetic. Guess what we call this condition now? Blunt's disease. In Game of Thrones, Sansa notes the following. The next morning, the morning of the 3rd day, Sir Boros Blunt of the King's Guard came to escort her to the Queen. Sir Boros was an ugly man with a broad chest and short, bandy legs. Bandy legs and bowed legs are the same thing, and most importantly, though not sex chromosome related, Blunt's disease has recessive inheritance. Some crackpots think that the 3 heads of the dragon will have 2 X chromosomes that carry the recessive dragon trait. Before going into detail about how this will work, one first has to answer the question, is George really thinking about X chromosome related traits? You're dang right he is. Septon Barth, the leading expert on dragons, is named for what? Barth syndrome, which is a very similar X-linked recessive pattern. Now, it's easy to understand how Daenerys gets 2 Dragon X genes. Her father, the Mad King Aerys, could provide 1. Her mother, Rhaella Targaryen, could provide the 2nd. I guess there's other ways Daenerys might have gotten her 2 Dragon X genes. It all depends on what tinfoil you subscribe to. In any case, the story must get even a bit messier with Tyrion and Varys, because men don't have 2 X chromosomes. Time to go through the looking glass. Alright, Tyrion's mother, Joanna Lannister, ovulates 2 eggs per cycle. During a short period of time, she is intimate with both the Mad King and her husband Tywin. Each of the eggs is fertilized by a different father. This is called heteropaternal superfecundation. We have numbers from DNA tests of twins in paternity cases that demonstrate this happens a small but statistically significant % of the time. Then these 2 eggs are fused, unlike with Jaime and Cersei in their case. But in Tyrion's case, they fuse together to make a chimera. And what is something unique about chimeras? Different colored eyes like Tyrion's. Google Tyrion has 2 dads later if you want more info. Can you now hear the Mad King talking to Tyrion, maybe in Darth Vader's voice? Tyrion, I am your father also. Sorry about that. So Tyrion can be double Dragon X, but what about Varys? Okay, what if Varys isn't a eunuch and his effeminate symptoms come from Klinefelter's disease? Klinefelter syndrome adversely affects testicular growth, which can lead to a lower production of testosterone. The syndrome may cause reduced muscle mass, reduced body and facial hair, and enlarged breast tissue. Not everyone has the same symptoms. We all know about Varys' lack of facial hair and his build. He's described as having soft hands and like a silly old woman. He likely prefers a flowery perfume. Varys giggles at least 8 times and sounds like a little girl. One must admit there's a good possibility of us having the proper diagnosis. Klinefelter and not eunuch. Then we got all this talk about his stones. From A Game of Thrones, Eddard 4. Littlefinger smiled. Leave Lord Varys to me, sweet lady, if you will permit me a small obscenity. And where better for it than here? I hold the man's balls in the palm of my hand. He cupped his fingers, smiling. Or would, if he were a man and had any balls. Like many things in Martin's writing, maybe it's not so black and white as Littlefinger puts it. Maybe the stones are just small and possibly dry. And the cool thing about Klinefelter's theory? It's it allows Varys to be double Dragon X. The most common cause of Klinefelter's disease is one extra copy of the X chromosome in each cell, so Klinefelters are XXY. For the longest time, I looked at the moon and it stared back at me with that exact same face. I never wondered what was on the far side, or even bothered to explore why that side never rotates into view. I was blissfully happy in my ignorance. I also used to think there were purple serpents at the purple wedding. Now I see Black Widow spiders as well. For Septa Shaena Productions, Sir Steffon, out. Oh yeah, thumbs up for Varus's Pebbles, and if you got anything wrong with the genetic stuff, feel free to curse me in the comments.